Begin the NFC South with the Carolina Panthers, a team that made the playoffs last year. One of 3 NFC South teams to reach the postseason. For Carolina, it starts with Cam Newton, one of the most unique talents the quarterback position has ever seen in the NFL, Mike. We can quibble over whether his accuracy issues are something that can be better, something that will stay the same forever. That might be more relevant to quote-unquote real football, because for fantasy football, Cam Newton is about as close to money in the bank as it gets at quarterback.
Yeah, no doubt. 22 passing touchdowns, 16 interceptions last season. Not too good, but like you said, in fantasy, we can deal with it because of what he does with his legs. In fact, last year, believe it or not, he set career highs in rushing attempts, rushing yards, and he's finished no lower than 4th among passers and carries, yards, and touchdowns during his 7 seasons. So each and every year, he delivers in that department. So especially in leagues where you get 4 points for a passing touchdown, he is a ton of value. He's been a top 4 fantasy quarterback in 5 of his 7 seasons. Like you said, high floor and obviously a high ceiling. We saw that a couple of years ago.
To your point, Mike, 44 more rushing attempts than any other quarterback. And I think this answers the question that people may have had. There was a concern. Remember Ron Rivera was saying, less running for Cam, because after his injury, he had the rotator cuff injury. He definitely takes a lot of hits. That's always been a topic of conversation. So it was going to be less designed run plays. Well, he's still running the ball that much more than any other quarterback. So the running's not going away.
Not just the runs, but the runs that count. As Kyle notes, Cam Newton became an NFL quarterback in 2011. Since that time, in 7 seasons, Cam has had 17 or more red zone rushing attempts in every single season. During that same stretch of 7 years, every other NFL quarterback combined has a total of 4 seasons with 17 or more red zone rushing attempts.
Crazy.
Yeah. He gets he might be, I say this often, I think he's the best goal line running back in the NFL, and he's a quarterback.
He's also huge. Like, when you see him, he's such a physical presence. I think that he's been more powerful between the tackles in the red zone than the running backs.
And third and 4th and 1, there's no better play than the QB sneak. And now we're talking about Cam Newton, not Drew Brees or some other pedestrian athlete, if you will. No offense to Drew Brees.
Wow.
Sure. You know what I mean?
No,
yeah, I'm saying athletic wise. Cam Newton is on a level of his own. So you know what I mean.
He sure
I worded that poorly, but.
Christian McCaffrey is his backfield running mate, his cohort, if you will, and McCaffrey comes in at 10 on my rankings, 11 in terms of the ESPN consensus rankings, and 11 on ADP. We've had this conversation about McCaffrey a lot recently. Talked about him, I believe it was on Monday with Matthew, just about how much potential he has, just how high of a ceiling he has. Mike, in fantasy football, for those who play PPR, he has so much ability as a pass catcher that separate and apart from what you think his ceiling is, his floor, again, super high.
Yeah, absolutely. And our David Newton said months ago that he was expecting the team to target about 200 carries for Christian McCaffrey this season. If he gets 200 carries, he had closer to 100 last year. If he gets 200 carries and still 70, 80 catches, I mean, he's probably going to finish as a top 5 fantasy running back. So, yeah, obviously the sky's the limit. But I'll play devil's advocate a little bit here. How good of a rusher is he? Because he had... I use the term loosely, but historically poor production rushing the football last year. 1.4 yards after contact per attempt. That's not good. That's one of the bottom 10 marks of the past decade, and history has shown that that's a bad sign for a player's career. So I don't know that he's proven himself as a rusher. He certainly has not. He's going to have to be better in that area, or we're going to see C.J. Anderson take a huge share of the carries.
Well, Stephania, people are concerned about C.J. Anderson's presence. He was signed to a 1-year deal after being released by the Broncos. I think it was right before their offseason program got going. And people are thinking, all right, well, where is he going to find a home? And he quickly found one in Carolina. It's a pretty minimal money deal, or I should say modest money deal for a player on a 1-year contract. Are you concerned about C.J. Anderson eating into Christian McCaffrey's workload?
No, I think the volume for McCaffrey is going to stand alone, and I'm not really worried about the presence of C.J. Anderson. I'm not worried about him near the goal line. Kyle gives us a stat. Over the past 3 seasons, Anderson has converted just 25% of his goal-to-go carries into touchdowns. So I don't think he's going to be a threat to take away the big scores from McCaffrey or from Cam, as we were talking about. I think he might be a change of pace guy. He's there for insurance, obviously, if anything happens to McCaffrey. But when you watch McCaffrey, I think, to your point about the rushing, he's the explosive playmaker guy. Like, I don't see him gaining the heavy yardage between the tackles, and maybe that's not going to be the strength of his game. But with more rushing opportunities, depending on how they design the play, I think that you're going to see he gets the bigger stretch gains to me.
Maybe what we're overlooking here is the offensive line in Carolina, because as of right now, and it is, of course, August 22nd, left tackle Matt Khalil is being called week to week with a knee injury, with a recent visit to Dr. James Andrews, by the way.
Having a procedure, I believe, having a surgery.
Left guard Andrew Norwell, departed in free agency, became at the time the highest paid guard ever, which has since been surpassed. Right tackle Darrell Williams, second-team All-Pro player last year. He is currently on the mend as well. Another starting guard dealing with an injury at the moment. We're talking about a team that is in flux at basically every spot other than center and right guard and Trey Turner and of course, Ryan Khalil, the center, is a very good player. How much does that concern you, Mike, about the ability for these sort of canals to be open for Christian McCaffrey, which is what he had in that 71-yard run a couple days ago?
Yeah, well, like I said, he struggled after contact, so he needs some lanes to run through. The nice thing is, again, and you touched on it right at the top, he has a high floor. So even if he can't run the ball, even if he averages 3.5 yards per carry, you know he's going to catch a lot of balls out of the backfield. He still can provide you fantasy value with poor efficiency because of the volume and the value. The fact is, a target is more valuable than a carry when it comes to fantasy football. You can get more yardage out of it. In PPR, our standard, you can catch a ball and you can catch a pass and lose 5 yards, and you still get positive points in fantasy. So as long as he stays heavily involved in that arena, he'll be fine. And we know that's not going to change.
We'll get to a steady tight end in just a minute, and steady's underselling him. But wide receivers in Carolina are a somewhat interesting conversation. I think they're sort of shaky, is what I think the perception for fantasy is. I like Devin Funchess as a player. He's a good player who's coming in inside the top 30 in our ESPN consensus ranks. Mike, you have him just outside. So I think we feel pretty good about Devin Funchess with flex level upside. But they did use a first-round pick on DJ Moore out of Maryland. He was actually the first wide receiver drafted in this year's class. Mm-hmm. Does he need to be on the redraft radar, Mike?
Are we talking about Moore or Funchess?
Moore.
I think he's a late-round flyer. I wouldn't go much further. He's one of a few. There's only a short list of rookie receivers who could be a top 2 guy or even a number 1 this season. Michael Gallup in Dallas being another one that stands out, but certainly Moore is one of them. If he proves to be the real deal, he looks great so far. He could pass out Funchess on the target totem pole and be the go-to guy in this offense. So, again, even if you think that's unlikely, it's still possible. And the fact that he probably will be out there in 2 wide sets puts him on the radar. So, yeah, absolutely, I'm taking that late-round flyer.
Okay, well, this is a good question via Twitter that was submitted by the Prince. We're not sure which Prince. I'm just going to assume Prince Harry. Is that?
I was thinking the Fresh Prince.
The Fresh Prince. Maybe both of them had the same question. Maybe they were thinking the exact same thing at the same time and took to Twitter to ask it.
Simpatico.
The question is this. Yeah. The Prince wants us to sell him on DJ Moore or Calvin Ridley is the top rookie fantasy wide receiver. Let's start in redraft. I think I know which way Stephania would lead in this debate.
Yeah, you know that I'm going with Ridley. That's my guy. I think we've already seen from him what he can do. We've seen these flashes in the preseason, especially while Julio Jones is resting. I like Calvin Ridley. I think he can make an impact. It might be a small one this year. Obviously, Sanu is there too. But if anything happens, if there's an injury to Jones or Sanu, you're going to want to snap up Ridley because he'll be utilized right away.
Mike, what say you?
Yeah, my pushback to that would be Moore doesn't necessarily need an injury, right? He can be the number 1 or the number 2 guy without injury in this offense. Now, it's obviously lower volume. They'll probably score fewer touchdowns through the air than Atlanta will. And I do think it's close. I mean, I could see Ridley having a season like Nelson Aguilar or Ted Ginn last year where the target share is not massive, but he hits a lot of big plays. There's so much attention on Julio or Michael Thomas in New Orleans. So I think it's absolutely possible, but I think Moore, I think he just has the higher ceiling. He just has an easier path to targets.
I think that Funchess is going to perform better than what we think. Because you don't forget, Kelvin Benjamin was there until just recently. So and then Funchess was banged up. So that relationship between him and Cam, as far as being the number 1 receiver, that was still in development, and I think that improves this year.
All right, for dynasty purposes, Mike, just to account for that part of the equation, because people are asking about dynasty every year, especially when we've seen so little success from rookie wide receivers of late, that you're maybe more thinking of them through the dynasty prism than you are the redraft prism. DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley, did they top your dynasty ranks for rookies this year?
Those two are 1-2, absolutely at the position. I'm taking that whole pile of running backs first, but late in the first round of your dynasty draft is where you should be looking at these 2 guys. And To pick between the two is tough. I lean toward Moore for two reasons. One, he's about 2 years younger, which is important in Dynasty. And he was the first receiver picked, which is important too. Pedigree does matter.
Quick hypothetical here, Mike. Because you don't have a lot of confidence in either one of these players for redraft leagues, Darius Geis, would he fall ahead of both of them in Dynasty drafts?
Yeah, it's a close call. I think your format definitely matters. Depends how small your benches are. If you have IR, there's a difference between a keeper and a dynasty. If you're keeping all of your players, obviously Geis has more value. But yes, the answer is yes. In my rankings, I do have Geis as the last running back and just ahead of the receivers.
Stephania, I think there's a chance that we're sleeping on a tight end who has been historical during his time in the NFL. Maybe 1 year clouds our perception of what Greg Olsen is. Are we not talking about him enough?
I think it's the whole recency bias thing.
Yeah.
People are like, yeah, well, last year he didn't do much. Well, last year he had a fracture in his foot and he missed essentially half the season. I mean, when he came back, you may remember he had a little aggravation of the foot. His foot was still sore. I mean, guys do come back from Jones fractures within a couple of months, but they're often dealing with some residual soreness. Occasionally there's a re-injury. He didn't have a re-injury per se, but they decided to basically hold him out off of turf until they could play him on grass just to make it a little easier on his foot. He had one big game after that injury. So I think people just completely wiped him out of the equation, and he's healthy now and he's no different. And prior to that, he hadn't missed a game. He's been as consistent and as durable at the position as anyone else.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think if I'm not mistaken, his very first game of his NFL career, he missed because of a knee injury, and then it went 10 years.
I almost didn't count that because once he started, he never came out.
That's right. So he goes through a foot injury last year, and I'm not, it's a reminder when a player comes back, even when they're 100%, that things can flare up or whatever. And it seemed like for a while he was not quite his regular self. But
absolutely,
in the playoffs last year, he had 8 catches for 107 yards plus a touchdown. Mike, I'll let you get to Greg Olsen in a second, but I'm going to steal a great stat. He's the only tight end in the history of the NFL. Think about some of the great players at that position. Ozzie Newsome, Mark Bavaro, Mike Ditka, Rob Gronkowski. The list goes on and on. Shannon Sharp. He's the only one to ever go 3 straight years with 75 or more catches and 1,000 or more receiving yards. Do we need to mention him in the same tier? I kind of think that there's a one tight end tier of Gronk, and then I feel like there's a second tier of Travis Kelce, Zach Ertz. Should Greg Olsen be part of that?
I have him the next tier down.
Okay.
I have him down with Delaney Walker and Evan Ingram. I think that's totally fair. I do view that as the hot spot this year, or the place you should attack at the tight end position. If you can get Olsen, looking at, let's just say 12-team leagues, 6th round for Olsen, 7th round for Delaney Walker, probably 6th round for Ingram as well. That's kind of your hot spot at the position. But I agree he's undervalued. Like you said, I hadn't missed a game since 2007. Before last year, he actually had 5 straight top 7 fantasy seasons, and during that span, first in snaps, targets, receiving yards, second in receptions, and fantasy points. The guy has been dominant. The only question I would ask you, Stephania, just to follow up, and this is what I was thinking while you were talking. He had the big postseason game, but he only had 17 catches in 7 games during the regular season. He missed some time. Should we be worried about another injury or a drop-off in play at his age now?
No, I don't think so. For what he's built for what he does, and that was an isolated issue, if you will. And often with these Jones fractures, you say Julian Edelman came back and then had a re-injury. We saw Des Bryant come back and had a re-injury. It's not uncommon for them to not be 100% until they get to the postseason. And I think that the relationship with him and Cam has been well established. He's a favorite outlet for him, especially in the end zone, in the red zone. And so I don't think that's going to change. The history is too strong there.
All right, sold. I'll take him. Round 6.
Sold. There you go. Mike Clay taking Greg Olsen, round 6 of his draft. Panthers are an exciting team this year. Let's keep an eye on them because that defense also could be good if the secondary comes around.